Good evening, sir.
Good evening, Greta. How are you?
Very well. So this was billed in part as a speech that would lay out Donald Trump's plan to destroy ISIS. Are you satisfied with the speech? Did you get that information?
Well, I think that one of the most important things you have to do is not have such a narrow focus. I think you have to look at this globally. What I would have recommended to Mr. Trump is that you sit down and look at what we call the geographic areas of responsibility. European Command, Pacific Command, Central Command, Africa Command, Southern Command, and then here in the continental United States of America. And what you want to do is apply what we call the 4 elements of national power, which is called the DIME theory: diplomatic, informational, military, and economic, to define the enemy in those respective geographical regions and talk about your strategy to defeat the enemies in those regions. I think that when we try to narrow this focus down to just ISIS, we miss out on the greater global Islamic Jihad issue that we have. And I think that that's where Donald Trump could have done a little bit better. I think that this whole thing about a commission on Islam, you have a National Security Council. That's the job of the President, the Secretary of State, the Secretary of Defense, and the National Security Advisor. So we don't really need to have another commission.
All right, so you don't like the commission. You wanted more details on his speech. So are you telling me that you were not satisfied with it, or did you get some information? As you listened to it today, do you have a greater sense of what he's going to do about ISIS if he's elected president?
Well, I think you have to be very fair and understand you're talking to someone that spent 22 years active duty military service, and even after that 2.5 years in Afghanistan training their forces, and I also spent a couple of years on the House Armed Services Committee. So I'm kind of privy to a little bit more of a strategic military decision-making process. And what I would recommend for Mr. Trump is to sit down with Major General Bob Scales, who used to be the Commandant of the National War College, and really understand strategic level decision-making, especially when, as I said, you relate that DIME theory, those elements of national power.
Well, I assume that he's got some military advisor. I think General Flynn is advising him. So, I mean, I assume that he has some military people advising him. Would you have wanted them to supply him with more details to lay out how he's going to destroy ISIS?
Well, I think that if you sit down with someone like a General Scales, who has been part of the academic environment that can talk about strategic imperatives, you know, for instance, I would say there are 4 critical strategic imperatives to defeat the global Islamic Jihad. It has to be denying them sanctuary. You have to cut off their flow of men, material, and resource support. You have to also win that information operations war and delegitimizing their ideology, and you have to cordon them off and not allow them to metastasize and spread across, many different nations. He did talk about the 18 nations where ISIS has a presence, but you have to talk about this greater movement. Now, General Flynn is without a doubt one of the foremost military experts in intelligence gathering and processes and procedures, and I think he is a very helpful asset to have. But I think that General Scales could really help him in fine-tuning his strategic vision when it comes to national security.
And I didn't mean by suggesting General Flynn to take anything from General Scales. In fact, I'll tell you, I'll give you a little tip. He has a new book coming out next month. I just saw an advanced copy. Anyway, that's my tip. Anyway, Colonel West, thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me, Greta.
In today's speech, Donald Trump talked ISIS.